what I want to do, if you guys don't mind, is I want to start off with a little quiz, just to kind of get our brains working in the morning. It's really easy. I'm going to ask you 8 questions from my trusty book. And when the question applies to you, do me a favor, raise your hand. And the second thing you need to do for me is remember the number of times that you raised your hands. Can you guys do that? All right, let's find raise your hand if you get 7.5 hours of sleep at least 5 days a week. Does that? Okay, we can do a little better on that. 3 full servings of vegetables or beans every day. And if everyone's not raising your hands at the beans ones, 30 minutes of rigorous exercise, at least 5 days a week. Biking, walking. Raise your hand if you have not had unprotected sex in the last year. Oh, I like this group. All right. Raise your hand if you belong to a faith-based organization and show up at least 3 times a month. You do that? Great. If you have not smoked in the last 5 years. All right. If you have 3 good friends that you can call on a bad day and those friends will actually pick up the phone and listen to you. Raise your hand. All right, that's good. And the last one is raise your hand if you think you'll live to your 90 and you actually want to. That last question is actually one of the biggest predictors of whether or not you'll make it to 90 years old, whether or not you want to. All right, if you raise your hand twice, your life expectancy for a man is 68, for a woman it's 71. If you raise your hand 4 times, it's 77 for a man, 81 for a woman. If you raise your hand 6 times, it's 81 for a man, 85 for a woman. If you raise your hand all 8 times, it's 88 for a man and 92 for a woman. So what I want to do today, and I'm going to start my presentation. What I want to do today is take people to the place of the world where people are living the longest life. And I want to share with you kind of how they did it. Not only as individuals, but I think more importantly, how they did it as a community. And I'm hoping to be able to tie that back in as you're thinking about how we increase in the consumption of beans around the world, really kind of bringing it back home with that. I read this article about 23 years ago about called the Danish Twin Studies. Talked about how long we live. That 80% of how long we live is determined by lifestyle factors and our habits. Only 20% is genetics or healthcare. If that's true, what we at Blue Zones wanted to do is travel the world to see if we could find the places in the world where people are living the longest life, where the lowest rates of middle-age mortality, places where they're reaching 100, rate 10 times higher than they're doing it in places like America, but I think more importantly, they do it with a fraction of the disease. Because it is about our quality of life, not just our quantity, right? My brother Dan and I partnered with National Geographic to find the 5 demographically confirmed places in the world where people are living the longest life. You notice that place in Russia where they're drinking a bottle of vodka and smoking a couple packs of heaters every day, didn't make it. Well, the reason is we actually went there with physicians. We went there with demographers. We went there with schools of public health. And together, through this research, we were able to find the 9 commonalities that flew through all the different regions. And I want to share with you what they are, but before I do you guys mind if I show you my vacation slides? I promise they're way better than the ones that my grandmother used to show. There we go. We found our first blue zone in Sardinia, Italy. It wasn't the whole island of Sardinia. It was the Nuoro province. 14 villages, 40,000 people, highest rates of male centenarians in the world. This is a place at 102, you're still riding a bike. It's a place at 104, you can actively chop wood and beat somebody 65 years your junior in arm wrestling. The guy over on the right is my brother Dan, my partner in crime, brainchild behind Blue Zones. And my older brother and my mentor, right up until the time that he got whooped. I didn't tease him, but Sardinia is a home of shepherds. These are people that are moving their flocks over rugged terrain, sometimes days at a time. Because of that, they had to come up with a portable food, an unleavened bread made from durum wheat, which is the same wheat you might find in a whole wheat pasta, a cheese made from a grass-fed animal, pecorino, very high in omega-3s, and a homemade wine called KEYNOTE wine. As it turns out, we were able to have this wine tested, and it has more of those polyphenols, more of those artery-scrubbing antioxidants, any other wine in the world. This is one of those longevity wines, pretty good for you. They lived off a plant-based diet, fruits and vegetables that they grew in their own garden. Were they vegans or vegetarians? No. They did eat meat, but it was that celebratory food. It was that food that they only had maybe 3 or 4 times a month, always in portion size about the size of a deck of cards, so a lot less than we tend to get when we go out to eat at the Hungry Heifer. But I think more important than their diet, more important than their exercise, it was their attitude towards aging. Here in America, social equity, and around the world, for the most part, social equity reaches its peak at about 26 years old. The older we get, the less revered we are in our communities. If you don't believe me, look at social media. Look at what's on the magazine on the checkout lane. The younger we are, the more revered we are. But in Sardinia, the older we are, the more revered we are. These are repositories of wisdom for that younger generation. These are people, when they age, they're brought into the house and they're surrounded by love. But they're expected to do more than just sit in front of the TV all day. They're expected to help raise the kids. These are people in their 80s, 90s, even 100, are still active members of the community. We found our second blue zone in Okinawa, Japan, highest rates of female centenarians in the world. And these are the longevity all-stars. If you look at their profile as compared to the United States, all these numbers I think are great. But what I like the best is they have the longest disability-free life expectancy. What I mean by that is they tend to live a long life. They die very quickly at the end. In America, there's a term, compression of morbidity. It's a time between when you get sick and when you die. It's where you spend most of your healthcare dollars. It's when you need that person to take care of you. And I average in America, it's about 4.5 years. In Okinawa, it's less than a year. They're living their life out at the end with vigor. They're living their life out, being able to do those things that they really love to do, those things that they want to do. They're doing it with a plant-based diet, fruits and vegetables that they grew in their own garden, some that you know, maybe some that you don't know. Does anyone know what this warty-looking cucumber is? It's called the bitter melon, or the Goya. What they do is they chop it up, they stir-fry with tofu, but it has more anti-inflammatories as any other vegetable. It's one of those longevity vegetables really good for you. But I think more importantly than what they put into their diet, it's what they took out of it. I've been blessed. I've traveled the world. I've been able to have meals with centenarians all over the world. And whenever you go and have a meal in Okinawa with the centenarian, they always say the same 3 words. Hara, hachi, bu. Which means I'm only going to eat till I'm 80% full. These are people that are controlling their caloric intake, and they have techniques set up to reinforce it, like pre-plating their food. We know from the Framingham study that isolation kills. In America, 30 years ago, the average American had 3 best friends. It's now down to a friend and a half, and if you can tell me where you get that half a friend, I think it's at social media or Twitter or Instagram. But as it turns out, if you have less than 3 friends, you're defined as lonely. And the impact that has on your health is comparable to smoking 20 cigarettes a day. Isolation kills us. Now, in Okinawa, the way they fight it is they'll get together when you're about 5 years of age, your parents will put you in groups with kids about the same age as you, and your parents will cultivate those relationships. So when you reach 20, they have the foundation to last a lifetime. Now, the reason I'm showing you this picture, they call them Moais. The reason I'm showing you this picture, these 5 women belong to the same Moai. 97, average age of 97. Or average age, 102, but they've been in the same Moai for about 97 years. They get together every night. They eat the soy noodles, the soybeans. They eat they talk about the day's events. They even argue about who that guy like Bass back in 1943. It was me. But I got a chance to ask this woman, what does it mean what does this Moai mean to you? And what she said is, every morning when I get up, I look out my front door and I see if my friends are there. And if they're not, I slide open my door and I go check on them. These are people that are growing old without the need of a long-term care nurse. They're growing old with a supportive network that they wake up every single day to help them out. They live by a sense of purpose, embodied in the word ikigai, the reason I get up in the morning. Whether you're a 95-year-old karate instructor that's still passing down the traditions that he's been fine-tuning for the last 80-some years, a spear fisherman gets him off his couch every day as he catches food for his extended family. And if you don't think keeps him in good shape, you're nuts. And Kamada-san. Kamada-san's ikigais are great-granddaughter. These 2 women separate in age by 101 and a half years. Now, I got a chance to ask her, how does it feel to hold somebody over a century or junior? She just kind of sat back, looked up and said, it's like leaping into heaven. It was like leaping into heaven. We found our 3rd blue zone, this one in America, Loma Linda, California. If you don't know where that is, you fly into LA, you take the San Bernardino Highway east about 80 miles. You got a cloud of smog following you like Pigpen from Charlie Brown. You get off on the Loma Linda exit, and the first 2 things you see, I swear, the first 2 things you see is a Del Taco and a Wiener Hut. You've now found America's blue zone. As it turns out, it's the home of the highest percentage of Seventh-day Adventists. These are people that evangelicize health, they evangelicize health care. They're people that celebrate the Sabbath on Saturday versus Sunday. Right now, if you look at the epidemiology data around them, on average, if you're a female, you're living about 9 years longer, and men are getting almost 10 years longer. So what are these people doing that are living next to the Del Tacos and the Wiener Huts to gain all this extra years of life? Is it their genetics? No. You go to an Adventist congregation, it's a congregational melting pot. You have people of African American descent, of Hispanic descent. You have people from European descent, Asian descent. So it's not their genetics. So what is it? Well, for starters, I mentioned earlier how they keep holy at Sabbath, sundown Friday, sundown at Saturday. It doesn't matter where the kid needs to be driven. Doesn't matter what the boss is telling them to do. These guys on check. They get up in the morning on Saturdays, they'll go to congregation with the rest of their friends. Afterwards, they'll do a potluck. And in the evening, or in the afternoon, supported from their scriptures, is to do a nature walk. Now, the definition of nature walk has changed over the years, but these are still people that get out every day and every weekend and let the stress of the week go. And they focus on what's important. They focus on their families, and they focus on their friends. If you look at the health traits that flow through this community, they tend to be very positive. They support each other in their vegan diets. When you look at people, what they're doing is they're passing down the food skills from generation to generation, which I believe is something that's lost in America. They come together and they share recipes with each other, as well as fashions. I was going to wear that suit, but it's at the cleaners. And they give people love when they're having a bad day, just that little extra support. It's the home of this man, Ellsworth Wareham, who was a multi-millionaire. Ellsworth when I met him, wanted to build a privacy fence. And a contractor comes out and says, it's going to cost you $8,000. And Ellsworth goes, well, for that price, I'm going to build it myself. And you could see him for the next 3 days shoveling dirt, pouring in cement, pounding in stakes, 94 years old. David McLean, National Geographic photographer, couldn't keep up with him. And 3 days later, perhaps predictably, Ellsworth could be seen in the operating room. Ellsworth is a surgeon in this picture. 94 years old, stood in multiple open heart surgeries. He's a guy who retired when he was 100. This guy is Ed Rollins, active cowboy. Gets up every day and does a swim. And then on weekends he puts on the boards, kicks up those rooster tails. 106 years old, he's not afraid of busting a hip. And Marge Deton, now, this is my brother's favorite story. I never got a chance to meet her. My brother's favorite story, so I always like sharing it. Marge gets up every day, about 4 in the morning, reads her Bible. Has the same breakfast she's had for years, oatmeal, nuts, raisins, chases it down with what she calls a prune juice shooter. I'll let you guys think about what that is and just push that image out of your mind. She jumps on the exercise bike 20 minutes every day, lift weights every day, before jumping in a repair Cadillac DeVille, where she still volunteers for 4 different organizations, including her words, not mine, the Loma Linda Old Folks Home. Now again, Marge is 103 years old. Now, you might not know a lot about my brother and I. My brother Dan holds 3 Guinness Book of World Records for long distance biking. Went from Alaska to Argentina on a bike. If you look at a map, it's all downhill. It's not that big of a deal. Around the world through the Soviet Union and through Africa, which was the first one I did until I got malaria at an inopportune time. Dan and I have both biked on 6 or 7 continents, been attacked by gorillas in South Africa, have diseases that my mother still gives me a wide berth whenever I come home. But Dan told me 2 things about Marge that I'll always remember. He said the most terrifying moment of his life was actually driving shotgun with Marge. And the second thing he said is, as they're driving down the street, she stopped at a stop sign. She said, Dan, I feel sexier at 103 than I did at 102. Now think about that. Is that what 103 feels like? Is that what it should feel like? So Dan wrote up the stories from National Geographic, one of the best-selling National Geographic. And in there, we talked about the 9 commonalities that flew through all the different regions that we travel. It was how they moved naturally. It's how they walked to school, walked to their bikes. The design of their communities allowed them to move more freely. They had the right outlook on life. They had a strong sense of purpose. Does anybody here know what the 2 most dangerous years of your life are? It's the year that you're born and the year that you retire. You are 30% more likely to die the year that you retire than your last year of work. Now, why is that? Is it because you finally said, hey, I get to go do that running of the bulls? Or no. We live purposeful lives, and sometimes when we retire, we leave that purpose. We lose that purpose. The Blue Zone communities, not only did they have a sense of purpose, but they could articulate it, whether they're 20 or 100. People who can articulate their sense of purpose live about 8 years longer. And they had less stress. Less stress tied to, that is tied to inflammation. If you can reduce stress in your life, it actually keeps us from getting those chronic diseases that cause us disease as we age. But they had a healthier diet, a lower caloric intake than we tend to have in America. They lived off a plant-based diet. I'm going to get more into this in a second. I might get back to beans, something I think is really important for you, for everyone in this room. And they had a little bit of wine. Research says 1 or 2 glasses of wine is actually good for you, but it's 1 or 2 glasses, and no, you can't save up and have 14 on the weekend. It's for those people that also have healthy relationships as well with alcohol. And I think the foundation that holds everything else up, it's how they connected, how they focused on, they had a strong sense of faith. We at Blue Zones, huge fans of faith. I don't care what your faith is. Not only did everyone but 2 of the centenarians we interviewed had a strong sense of faith, but 2 small universities did research and said people who have a strong sense of faith and show up live 4 to 14 years longer. Again, don't care what your faith is. I'm just telling you what the research says, and that was done by Duke and Harvard University. They also had a family, was really important. They were surrounded by love all the way through their lives. And their friends. The friends matter. According to the Framingham study, if your 3 best friends are unhappy or overweight, if your 3 best friends drink too much, or smoke, there's a 150% chance that you do as well. That health traits actually flow through a community in the same way a virus does. Think about that. Are you healthier with that friend that likes to sit on the couch and eat chicken wings? Or healthier with that friend that likes to share ideas around how we cook beans, how we eat healthier on our diets, that is challenging us to leverage our purpose and to bring it out. Now, before you write down names of people that you're crossing out of your life, you still need those friends that you can pick up the phone when you're having a bad day and call them. And not only will they pick up the phone, but listen to you. Now, to go back to the food, specifically trying to talk about the food, if you look at the average American diet right now, and I think if you look around the world, you're seeing the same types of issues. On average, you're eating about 208 pounds of meat every year. You're eating about 607 pounds of dairy product, 91 pounds of sugar. We have sugar, and we do sugar everything in our life. 46 slices of pizza, 66 pounds of chips, 58 gallons of soda pop. If you look at that diet, our plate tends to be a lot more animal protein and very high in sugars, with just a little bit of plants on the side when it looks at our proteins. Now, we come out and we'll talk to people about what do we need around nutrition in our body and what's the best diet for us to have, right? But these diets are confusing. Nobody really knows what's right and what's wrong in this. Everybody has different opinions. So what we did with Blue Zones is we went back and partnered with about 150 dietary studies of the foods that were brought into the Blue Zones. What were they eating in these communities that allowed them to have such amazing success? And not only, again, in the quantity of life, but the quality, less disease, being able to live out their purpose at the end with less disease. And what we're able to do is synthesize those to come up with the world average of the Blue Zone plates. And we looked at it individually. In Sardinia, for example, a lot of barley in their diet, sourdough bread. Some people believe with that sourdough bread, it lowers your glycemic index with the way that they were eating that sourdough bread. Fava beans, very strong. They'd not only have it kind of cold with olive oil on it, but they would also mix it with their minestrone soup. Tomatoes were the other one. And Ikaria, wild greens, again, beans, potatoes, olive oil, lemons. You look at that sugar content is a lot less than here in America, very little meat. When you look at that sugar, what they were doing was adding things like honey, more of those natural sugars to their diets versus the processed stuff that's worse for us. In Okinawa, tofu, sweet potatoes, the bitter melon, brown rice, and turmeric, you get that whole grain. But one thing left off here was soy, was they eat a lot of soybeans. The natto, they eat a lot of soy through their diet. And if you look at the research tied to soy, it's actually really good for you that when you eat those soybeans. And I don't have to tell people here because I think there's people who know nutrition a lot better than I do. But it helps lower it helps with our healthy cholesterol, which lowers our chance of heart disease. In the Nicoya Peninsula, corns, beans, squash, This is basically a diet that they've been doing since early 1,000 years. Passing it down through traditions all the way through it. Papayas and bananas, which increase that sugar, and they did eat some meat there. And then Adventists, avocados, oatmeal, nuts. A handful of nuts every day, according to the Adventist study, helps you live about 2 to 3 years longer. Soy milk, whole wheat bread, again, full on those grains and full on those diets. And the research, there were studies done that also said how when they included beans, like peas and other green beans in their diet, created those people that did that 30 to 40% less chance of colon cancer when they started increasing their diet with beans. So if you look at what you have here, if you take all of these diets and merge them together into the average longevity diet of these blue zones, what you're seeing again, there are some animals, but it's mostly plant-based, very little sugars. If you look at what they're eating, it's mostly plant-based, carbohydrates, starches, very, very, everybody says carbs are bad for you, but please remember a tomato is a carb, as well as a lollipop. There's good carbs and there's bad carbs out there. Grains, they ate the whole grains, greens and sweet potatoes. They here's the big reveal. They ate a cup of beans every day. A cup of beans that help that stomach health, that those fibers help the microbiome, help regulate our health, help regulate our mood, support it. All the blue zone communities, it is the superfood that we'll talk about is about a cup of beans every single day in the blue zones. They ate a lot less meat, about 5 times, no more than 5 times a month, fish no more than 3 times a week. No cow dairy in those diets. Nuts, I mentioned earlier, and then their beverages were water, tea, a little bit of wine, but what I liked about it the most was when they ate their meals, they ate with their family. They ate with their friends. They weren't eating alone. They ate with a group of people, right? So that's the comparison of the diet. Now let's look at what's happening in America when it comes to our health. 50 years ago, people had 1/3 the rate of obesity. 50 years ago, people had 1/7 the rate of diabetes in America. And according to some studies, 1/10 the rate of dementia. 1/10 the rate of dementia. And if you look at what we do is we say, well, you know what? You have to go on a diet. You got to eat more beans. You got to eat healthier. But the problem is as you look at it, we right now spend over $60 billion on telling people to go diet. And if you want to create a health program that are fighting the chronic diseases that are killing our kids, none of these work. Health clubs and exercise. If I came up with that blue zone pill, take it every day, you couldn't get people to take it long enough. And diets, they don't work. If you look at the research, if I got 100 people to do the blue zone diet today, within inside of 3 months, 10 would drop off. Within inside of 7 months, only 10 would still be doing it. And after 2 years, almost no one. So you're getting short-term success, but long-term failure. If you're trying to get people to eat more beans because of their diet and pushing it in there, these strategies do not work. They don't work. So how do we then help people to be able to live the lives that we emulate, the lives of vigor, the lives as we grow older, you're still active and being able to do things. Water skiing. Who water skis at 106 years old? How do we do that? Well, about the same time, when you look at what we have for our food systems here in America, we trying to sell the most unhealthy things for us. We're designing foods with macaroni and cheese Cheetos, where every time we drive down the street, you have to go through a gauntlet of unhealthy choices that create convenience. And if you go, and if you look at their advertising, Madison Avenue makes what, $40 billion a year on selling us the things that are unhealthy for us. And can I be honest with you? There's just some places where we don't have to advertise hot dogs. Okay, really bad joke, but I always love telling it. So what do? Well, back in 2008, we were hired by AARP, National Institute on Aging, to try to find the place in the world where people, where they had chronic health programs, public health programs that were fighting the chronic diseases and doing it without the Hawthorne effect. And one of them was North Karelia, Finland. It's a place where at 54 years old, people are dropping dead, cardiovascular disease, higher rates than anywhere else in the world. It's a place where they love their meat, they fried everything in butter, but it's also a place that had access to healthy foods. They had that access, but nobody was eating it. A guy named Pekka Puska entered the room. He said, you know what? Individual discipline, that's important. People need to take responsibility for their diets. Public health officer said, I'm not investing $1 in that. And instead what he did is broke down the silos and brought a bunch of people together to say, how am I setting up an environment where that healthy choice is unavoidable inside of these communities? And I'll give you a couple examples around food and how he did it. If you looked at the fat content in the dairy at the time, really unhealthy. So what he ended up doing is he worked with the feed and what are you feeding them to reduce that content, that fat content, make it a little bit healthier for people that were drinking milk. They had access to fruits. They had access to fresh vegetables. They had all year round, but the problem is because of seasons, it became seasonal. So there's some seasons where you didn't have access to those healthy foods. So what they did is created partnerships, created food hubs where people were able to come together. So any year around and store it. So any time around the world, they had access to those healthy foods. This one to me is the most interesting. He worked with the butcher to say, help me lower the fat and sodium content of the meat by 20%. This butcher's like, no way, I'm going to lose money doing that. I make money on the sausage. If I change that recipe, it's going to do it. He said, yeah, just give it a try. And he gave it a try for 1 month. Lowered the fat content, lowered the sodium, advertised it as healthier, put it on their shelves. And what he found was not only did they sell more, but he made more profit on it. And oh, by the way, the people in that community they didn't know any difference. They're just eating healthier without even knowing it. It was oblivious to them. The team got together, and what I really like is what they were able to do by setting up that environment is reduce coronary mortality in middle-aged men by 80% and sustain it to this day. So I tell you this because when I think about, very clear, beans are the magical fruit. The question is, how are we getting more people to be able to access it? When you look at our community work, what we focus on is a bunch of different areas. I'm right now bringing, not only just the food, but the pro-purpose, pro-social, pro-walkability. But what we focus on is how are you setting up an environment where that healthy choice is unavoidable? Where it's not a conscious choice, oh my God, I have to eat beans. But the design of it is. So when you look at your homes, what's on your counter? Is it a cookbook around how do you make healthy cooking easy? Or is it a bag of chips? Is it that unhealthy cookbook? How are you looking at creating social relationships with your friends that support and exchanging recipes and coming together? How are we looking at those places where we spend our time? Our work sites, our restaurants, our schools for our kids. What's that access? In our grocery stores, what's the last thing you see in a grocery store when you check out? Is it a healthy choice? So how are we working with these people to make the design of these stores so that healthy choice is easier? How are we creating those systematic partnerships? And then as we look around built environment, we look around food systems, How are we creating better access, more affordability to these healthier foods for everyone, no matter what your socioeconomic status? But how are we also looking at food skills that I think we lost, which I think everybody knows. Nobody feels like they know how to cook beans, but it's really easy. And then how do you make sure that it fits with the culture? So when we think about beans, we're trying to think globally, but it is at a community level, it is really local. It's neighborhood based because the tastes of one community are different than those tastes for the other. You know, in the Blue Zone communities, each one of them had different tastes. Now, the goal of it is, can you design an environment where no matter how I'm interacting in that community, the healthy choice is easier, ideally through access to healthier beans. Now, we've done this Blue Zone in all these communities across the United States, and I'm not going to spend time on this, but if you look at what we did in the beach cities, they saw a tick of healthier uptake of healthier foods, including beans, by 6% over a 7-year period, because we designed an environment that made it unavoidable, that made it easy, you know, through that work. But I think what's more important is if you can think about the environmental changes, not around diet, not around programming, but think about environment changes. These are semi-permanent to permanent changes of these environments that allow us to be able to once they're in place, they're there all the time. Think about it. I'll put it in a way, not food. Think about a walking path in your community. You design a walking path around something that's beautiful, around a great place to go look and see it. You're going to walk and exercise with your friends, and you're going to do it without having to get a gym membership. How are we designing our environments? When you look at Eat Wisely, we at Blue Zones, we think about 4 things. We think about how do we know as individuals what is that right food for our body? What do we need in order to be healthy? What is that education around there so you're clear on what that healthy choice is? The second thing we try to look at is what is the right rituals around food? Is your life set up so most of your food is ordering by number as you're driving through that drive-through? Or do you sitting down with family, taking turns kind of thinking through the tastes that each other's like, and including things like beans in those diets? So you have that ritual where every night, you know, one of the ones that I think everyone knows, I think it was General Mills that did it, was promoting Taco Tuesday, where you brought in those beans and it became a tradition for you to do it. You had that right ritual where every Tuesday you're eating healthier. It has to be tasty. I can tell you to eat beans, but if you don't like beans, you're not going to eat it. So how do you make it taste good, right? And I'll add something to that in a second, but the last thing is, how do you make it easy? You know, we sit here living very busy lives. Your consumers are incredibly busy. They get up every day, they work hard, they come home, they got to drive their kids to soccer and all that other stuff. This is all things you guys know. That right now, the taste to make it easy is easy. You can put a bag in a microwave to do it. You know, what I do is I have the Instapot. In the morning, I'll do black beans. I'll do this minestrone soup that actually came from Icaria, very heavy and 3 different kinds of beans. And the interesting thing about this soup is the longest aged people in the world. They were a family of longest lived family in the world. 8 people lived about 790 years. This family. Every single day they ate this minestrone soup. It takes about 20 minutes to make in an Instapot. It's easy and everybody likes it. So how do you make it taste good? But also, how do you make it taste around the culture? People are going to come to you and they're going to say, oh, it's too expensive. You all know the price of beans. But let's think big picture around the price of foods. At the end of the day, not only immediately do we create better, you know, how to make it cheaper and understand the cheaper, making it easy, tasty, with the right rituals and know that it's good for them. But the other thing around it is we sit here every day and we go, oh, it's too expensive, but we discount the fact that 10, 20 years down the road, we're going to have these chronic diseases, diabetes, heart disease. The benefits of those foods in our microbiome, of beans in our microbiome, keep us from getting diseases 10 years that are going to cost significantly more than even if that food that we're buying is more expensive. It's the long term of it as well. So that's kind of the biome of it. And the last thing I want to do is it's social. You got to also make it social. If I go to a friend's house and I'm a vegan or vegetarian and they're not, creates struggles in our diets, right? So how do you make this also social? So in closing, I don't think I have to tell anyone that we have a crisis around our health right now. I mentioned earlier the diabetes burden. I mentioned earlier around dementia. In Okinawa or in Ikaria, Greece, I met 70 people over the age of 85 had zero dementia. What is that? Isn't that the way we all want to live? If you look at America right now, the life expectancy of our kids is less of that of our own. Is that what we strive for? Or do we strive for having better lives for our kids? We know the diets, we know the exercise, but the environment is not designed for it. They spend billions of dollars every year selling us the things that are worse for us. You can't go through a retail shop. 60% of retail stores, you have to go through a gauntlet of food that's bad for us. 250,000 fast food restaurants. So how do we change this? How do we take it out of the individual discipline, because discipline is a muscle, and make the consumption of beans part of our life? I believe that it doesn't lie with large pharmaceuticals or you get the support of national and international organizations. But I got to be honest with you, I think it lies more local. It lies with the food systems in our communities to create strong partnerships and alliances to break down the silos so everyone's working together in those communities to design an environment where the consumption of a cup of beans every day just happens. It's not a mental exercise. It's the design through partnerships with our restaurants in our states, through partnerships with our grocery stores, through partnerships with our schools and our food systems in our schools, that is creating the dietary stuff that our kids are starting off at a young age. To look at our schools and the design to make them understand what's good for them. To look at marketing campaigns that are local, that make environments so that we can all wake up every day, look at that person lying next to us in bed and say, you know what? I feel sexier at 103 than I did at 102. I appreciate your time, and there again, lots of stuff you're going to hear over this conference around the nutrition and the benefits. Again, I would just think about how are we setting up environments where that healthy choice is unavoidable. So thank you so much.